Hey, I'm Alex Ratcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Dinogenics and its expansion, Controlled Chaos. I should note that if you're watching this video when it first goes up, there is a crowdfunding campaign for a reprint and new expansion to this game that ends in the next 2 days, and that's particularly worth noting because this is a game that is frequently hard to get your hands on, and outside of crowdfunding campaigns has limited availability. That said, everything I'm covering today is the game that already exists. I'm not covering anything here that's a prototype, I'm not covering anything here that's from the new campaign, I'm just covering Dinogenics and its expansion, Controlled Chaos. Arguably the deluxe metal coins too, but that's not really going to be covered much in this video. Let's go ahead and talk about this game. I'm going to talk about what the base game of Dinogenics does first, then I'll tell you what Controlled Chaos adds, and then of course my thoughts and opinions on the game, links and timestamps to everything down below. Starting off with the fact that Dinogenics is a 1 to 5 player worker placement dino park game. That's the basic idea. Don't be too intimidated by the sheer amount of things on the table over here. This at its core is a fairly straightforward worker placement game. Not to minimize the strategy at play, but the complexity is not that much. I would say, in fact, if you have this game on your shelf and you open that rulebook once upon a time and you're like, this is so many pages, I don't want to read that, the rulebooks for this game, both the base game and the expansion, are actually fairly short, mostly consisting of a whole bunch of extra solo scenarios comprising like 2/3 or half of the rulebook, which might intimidate you more than it needs to be. But that said, the basic idea is the game is going to play across 7 rounds. Solo scenarios can be different, we'll talk a little bit about those later, but the basic idea of the game is it plays across 7 rounds and you are trying to manage your dino park. Players are going to have their own individual parks over here that they're building out on their own little player boards as they gather fences, gather dinosaurs, place them all into your park, gather all the buildings you need, everything you're trying to do to basically score as many points and build your engine as much as possible. Now the core idea is its worker placement. You're going to start the game with a variable number of workers depending on player count, getting another worker in the, I believe, 4th round over there. You're going to get a new worker as well, although again the number you start with does depend on the player count, and you're going to be placing those workers onto the various zones on the board in order to do everything. And by everything, there's not that much you really need to think about. At a high level, you're trying to gather DNA cards to build dinosaurs, you're trying to gather goats to feed your carnivores in your park, you're trying to gather fences to place them into your park, and then you're trying to gather manipulation cards because they're fun and cool and let you do powerful things. Those are the core things you're trying to do. Oh wait, and buildings. You're trying to build buildings as well. That's going to be the last thing over there. Now those 5 things are the core things you're trying to do. Everything else is kind of just enabling that puzzle. But for example, you can go over here to site A over here where you can gather DNA cards from the deck. You can just go ahead and gather 2 DNA cards, add them straight to your hand, boom, you got new DNA cards. You can see and you can use these towards building dinosaurs. You can go to site B over here where you can draw 3 and discard 2. So you get an extra draw, which means more possibilities of getting what you want, but you only end up with 1, so it's not as cool. You can go over here, well, you go specifically to the city center where you can use the market. The market is where you can buy or sell DNA cards from a publicly visible amount of things so you can actually see what it is you're buying or selling. You can go to the boneyard where you'll take a scandal, but you get to go ahead and dig for dinosaur DNA in the boneyard. Again, you get to see what's out there. You don't even have to pay for it. You do take a scandal, that'll cost you later. So already we have 4 actions just designed to get you DNA cards, which makes sense because DNA cards are the main, well, DNA of how you build out your dinosaurs. We'll come back to those later. You can go ahead to outsource, which is an action where you can pay 2 money and then use any occupied space. It's a great flexible action, letting you use stuff that's been used before. You can go to the agency, where you can go ahead and draw manipulation cards over here. So you can draw 2 manipulation cards, and you could uplink to play a manipulation card. Manipulation cards are basically just the wild cards of the game, giving you all kinds of powers and abilities and things that you don't necessarily know what they're going to do for you, but they often can be fun. So gathering them and playing them, well, it's fun. It's often fun. That's what I said over there. It's fun. We have turning in DNA over here. When you go ahead and get a complete set of DNA, or you can make a mutant, but we're not going to focus on that in this video over here. You can go ahead and get a complete set of DNA and place a dinosaur. The way that works over here, let's go ahead and grab my hand, for example. Gallimimus over here, let's grab some Gallimimus. Gallimimus requires 2 DNA cards to be able to place this dinosaur into my park. Each dinosaur has a different number, and it's showing you how many matching cards you need to be able to place it. As other factors, is it an omnivore? Is it a carnivore? What's the sell cost, the buy cost? What's the ability? And then what are all the stats around victory points, reputation, and dinosaur enclosure that you need to know? All that's going to be printed on the card, and you use the Dinogenics spot to go ahead and build them. Going to the farm over here is going to give you 3 goats over there, so you're going to get extra goats, which you can use to feed your carnivores. And then over here at the city center, the ferry is going to give you straight money, so you can get money over here. The timeshare gives you a guest and money, but you have to have space for them in your hotel. And then over here in the city center, you're you're going to be able to use the market, which is one of the actions we talked about already. You can purchase fences, 3 fences specifically, or you can purchase facilities or repair facilities, which is how you get those buildings in play. So that's the core idea of all the worker placement stuff, not that intimidating overall. Now that you know the general arc of the worker placement stuff, the game's going to go through a cycle every single round across those 7 rounds where new visitors are going to visit your park. You're going to go through a sequence of actual actions. You're going to get money for your visitors as well. Each visitor earns your income, but you have to have space for those visitors. That's why you're building out various hotels on your park. In addition to your starting hotel, visitors are going to give you money as well as victory points if they are alive at the end of the round. You do kind of want them alive at the end of the round, but you can't guarantee that they will be. And so you're going to go through again that visitor phase, getting paid for your visitors. They're paying to enter your park after all. Going through the worker placement phase on this board over here where you place your workers out, taking turns on the various players, trying to figure out what it is you want to do, which cards do you want manipulation cards, are you going to use an action somebody else used, are you going to gather more visitors, all of those things and more, and then trying to place them all on your board where you're going to be managing the supply of dinosaurs and fences. You see, the problem with dinosaurs is they can rampage. They're not always going to do so, but they can rampage. And dinosaurs will rampage in one of 3 situations. Either if you place a dinosaur into a spot on the board that does not have an actual enclosure, with the exception of the Brontosaurus. One specific animal doesn't mind being in the wild, but most dinosaurs want to be, well, they don't want to be, they have to be in an enclosure, or they're going to rampage, possibly breaking buildings or killing visitors. Secondly, is that at the end of a round, if you don't feed your carnivore dinosaurs, they're also going to rampage because, well, they're hungry. They're hungry. They're going to go ahead and try to tear down fences, destroy buildings, so make sure you always have enough goats to feed your carnivores. And thirdly, some events will make your dinosaurs do various rampage checks as well. When you rampage, you're going to roll dice over here, and there are 3 sides. There's going to be this side over here, which is the worst one. This kills a visitor and breaks a building. This one just breaks a building, and then this one is a gullible little visitor who thinks you put on a nice little show and display, and is actually going to go ahead and tip you because you're like, ooh, scary dinosaurs, nothing happened, that was fun. It happens, and it happens. They're gonna tip you for having an unsafe park. That's the thing in this game. But that's basically the arc you're going to go through across 7 rounds. Now, at the end of the round, what you're going to do is you're going to check your reputation on these tracks over here. You see, as you build dinosaurs, there's a reputation score that's going to be in play, and that reputation score is going to reward you with victory points every single time. So you're going to be getting victory points all the time on a regular basis, based on the, you're going to be getting victory points at the end of the round for your dinosaurs based on the dinosaurs you have in your park. So it's a constant check to make sure you can maintain those dinosaurs and get those recurring victory points every single round. You're also going to get victory points for the various guests that did not get eaten because, well, they're happy. They're happy for this day, and they're happy they showed up, and they're happy to go ahead and tell all their friends about your park. That's basically the core idea of Dinogenics over here. In the game, you're going to be managing a park. You're going to be getting a lot of buildings. We haven't talked about the buildings. There's a lot of buildings over here. Let's see if we can show you the various, here's all the various buildings you have in the park across, well, this is the expansion. This is the base game sheet for buildings and the expansion sheet for buildings, giving you a lot of different buildings. You also have the base game sheet for dinosaurs, as well as the expansion sheet for dinosaurs, giving you a lot of different dinosaurs in the park. And speaking of which, let's go ahead and talk about what the expansion adds to the game, because the expansion, well, adds things, and we should tell you what they do. The expansion is going to add this sideboard over here, which you may have noticed we haven't talked about at all. This is the controlled chaos sideboard. It adds an aquatic set of DNA cards, the eDNA cards. It adds aquatic spots in your park that can go into your park. You can now get aquatic dinosaurs, and you can also go to the various spots over here to take any of the actions here, getting new buildings over here. So a whole set of new double tile buildings, a whole set of specialists over here. These specialists, they're going to cost you manipulation cards. You have to discard manipulation cards you're not playing, but you can go ahead and use those towards these specialists, giving you ongoing abilities, whether giving you income or points or different things in the game that just give you something that breaks the rules. Not that dissimilar than buildings, but just a new way to go ahead and gather those. And then that's basically the main thing. Oh, and then there's some things mixed into the base game. There's going to be new basic dinosaurs added to the base game, new buildings added to the base game, so some new stuff, new manipulation cards, new events, all of those, which means it's effectively adding a lot of mixed in content, but also new content to your game. Before we dive into the review part of this, let's go ahead and take a second to talk about these solo scenarios. Both the base game and the controlled chaos are going to come with full sheets of solo scenarios. I think there's 10 in the base game. I'm not sure if I know the amount in the controlled chaos expansion, but they add a bunch of solo scenarios that will give you rules modifications on how to play the game solo. You set up for 2 players, but then past that they'll tell you some rules. Maybe you're starting off at a later point, maybe you have new things, new goals, new checks for victory points and all that. And they just give you something you're trying to do that's a slight shift or adjustment from the base game, along with rules and setup that will be a major shift and adjustment from the base game, oftentimes at least. And they give you a challenge to go for as far as the scores you're trying to achieve, and possibly win or loss conditions as well. And so that gives you a lot of playability, especially if you're tackling this game as a solo player. I believe Controlled Chaos even has cooperative scenarios. I have not played those, but I believe I've seen them in the back of the rulebook. And with that, it's time to go ahead and dive into our review with what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like. In general, the sheer card variety of this game, and building variety for that matter, is going to give you a ton to do. And to some extent, I'm going to be focusing on both of these at once, not just the base game. I'm going to be talking about both of these together. But the sheer amount of variety you have, just from the manipulation cards over here, there's a giant stack full of these with all the unique abilities. You have the breaking news cards. This is a giant stack of events. You're only going to see 7 of these in a game. 7 of these in a game. It's a little insane, the sheer number of these that they have, giving you something different that's breaking news every single turn. You have the dinosaurs, all of which have abilities on them. In addition to the basic stats and basic things you need to be mindful of, they also have abilities that will adjust how you engage with the game as well. There are the buildings. The buildings are going to give you even more things to focus on, because buildings, you have a watchtower that will go ahead and protect you from rampages once per round. You have all these things that are going on, all these abilities that mix. And then there's, of course, there's a specialist from the expansion, giving you even more abilities along with new buildings. And so the sheer amount of things that adjust and tweak what is otherwise, again, this is not a complicated game to learn, but the amount of things that will mix up the experience and give you a lot to consider, there's a lot going on in this game. And it's a tight worker placement puzzle to begin with. The entire game of trying to figure out, you only have X amount of workers over here. At a lower player count, you can have 4. At lower player counts, you'll have 4. At higher player counts, you'll have 3. And then you're going to be adding workers to the game as well once you get to the round 4 over there. You have a limited number of worker placements to go ahead and engage with across the course of the game, and you need a certain amount of them just to get your DNA cards, to go ahead and build your dinosaurs, and then you need to maintain everything. You need goats, because goats are essential. Well, you don't need goats. It depends if you build carnivores. If you build carnivores, you need goats, and goats will give you all these victory points, so it's kind of worth engaging with them, because a park full of stegosauruses is cool for 2 seconds, but not nearly as exciting as the raptor charging the fence, and the game knows it and rewards you accordingly. And so there's so much going on as far as the challenge of how to get all the things you need, from money to goats to fences and the DNA cards, and then doing all of that while trying to do that little bit extra that you're constantly trying to get to. There's lots of ways to build out your park, whether you go heavy on carnivores, whether you have no carnivores at all. You can try it, see how it works for you. You can go light on carnivores, mix that in with a whole lot of buildings. You can go heavy on the visitor strategy, just trying to accumulate as many visitors as you possibly can. The highest reputation park will gather more visitors, but also the high reputation parks often have carnivores, so how are you going to juggle the fact that you want those carnivores in your park, but you don't want them eating your visitors? There's a lot to think about as you try to balance all of these things in the game, and just in general giving you a tight worker placement puzzle, along with just so many things to consider and do as you go through it. The expansion adds a lot that really adds to the game. One of the things that is tough, especially in the base game, is your ability to play manipulation cards is limited. You're looking at this one spot over here, well, I guess it depends on the player count. You're looking at these spots over here, plus the outsource option, which means there's not a lot of ways to actually play those manipulation cards you've been gathering. But over here, you can go ahead and trade those manipulation cards in for specialists, so it's nothing actually gets wasted. It really adds an extra element, in addition to all the ways the expansion just nicely complements the base game. That thing alone is a good way of not having to waste your manipulation cards in the game, of giving you a way to actually trade them in for other things. Overall, the game just gives you a lot of ways to approach a fairly straightforward engine. The straightforward engine is gather dinosaurs, which means gather DNA cards, build your dinosaurs, put them into your park, build fences, acquire visitors, rinse and repeat for 7 rounds. The question is, what are you going to combine together to give you that feeling of, why am I playing this again? What am I doing differently every single time? Am I diving into aquatic animals this time? Am I trying those larger buildings? Am I focusing on having as many guests as possible? Am I focusing on building as many fences? Do I want to go ahead and just get a bunch of mutants and try to go, which again, we haven't talked about mutants, but I'm trying to just get a bunch of mutants because it'll be easier to go ahead and get my hands on, even if they're a little bit chaotic to deal with. There is so much going on in this game where the core rule structure is fairly straightforward, but the amount of things you can consider and do is a lot. As far as what I don't like in the game, there's going to be 2 things. The first is nearly everything in the game requires a player reference. Now, the game does a good job of having some of those things, like you have your dinosaur stats on the sideboard, which is great. You have a small little reference card, which gives you the actual abilities. But I do find that a lot of the time you are going to be referencing these sheets, especially until you know the game very well. You'll be frequently referencing these sheets for all the various dinosaurs and all the various buildings, because there's a lot of things. So sure, the specialist over here tells you what it does on the card, but everything else needs a lot of referencing over here, and it's not inherently a bad thing. I think the problem I have is more so the dinosaur cards I can get past, because the cards themselves at least say things on them. I think the buildings are the biggest area, where the buildings you are constantly going to be trying to reference a sheet to see what a building does until you actually learn it, and even once you do, at a glance, they're not immediately intuitive. They're very small print over here. It's hard to see across the board, so small nitpick around the buildings. On a more bigger issue for me, I think that you have a limited number of worker placement actions in this game, and so many of them are devoted to core structural things you will always need to do game game to game. You will always need to get your hands on fences. You will just need fences. That's not a question. You will always need fences. And so many of your core actions are just like, okay, well, I have to get fences. Granted, you can get them through manipulation cards, so there are some other ways to get it, but for the most part, it's like, great, I'm going to place a worker on the fence zone because I need fences, on the city center to go out and get fences. Assuming you have carnivores, which most games you will need to get your hands on goats. Again, see what I said before. You can go get manipulation cards, sometimes they'll give you goats, but for the most part, you'll be placing your workers to get goats. You'll be placing your workers to get DNA cards. Now, that one's a little bit more interesting because there are several ways to get DNA cards, so that one at least feels like there's more of a choice. But I think my bigger issue is some of the basic commodities you need in the game, and some of the ones you will constantly need on a repeated basis, are fairly standard actions you'll just need to take. And so a good chunk of your actions, I'd say somewhere in the range of 40% of your actions in this game, often feel like you're just doing the thing to get money, to get fences, and to get goats, and they don't feel like interesting actions. They just feel like, well, I have to do some degree of maintenance and support, which just removes some of the fun. If you're placing a bunch of workers and only some of them actually feel like you have a choice, and the rest feel like you have to enable what you're doing in the game, then that part is less fun. And that's the main thing I think that holds this game back a little bit for me. As far as what I can see others not liking, there's a few things there. First of all, rampages can happen, and even if you build the perfect park, you'll get an event. Now, the good news is you do see the events coming up, so you have some time to prep, but it doesn't count for that much when you have everything rampaging in your park and you built an entire carnivore-based park, and everything's trying to go ahead and get out and destroy, well, the rampage, whether or not there's a carnivore. But the rampages in the game can be brutal, and can be punishing, and can mess up all your plans, and you can't even perfectly stop them from happening. There'll even be times where, first of all, there's the events, like I said already, but then also there'll be times where you just get locked out of the goat market. Other players go to the goat market first, and you have no goats coming your way this round, and you needed goats, and now everyone's going to go ahead and be unhappy, and the visitors are going to be unhappy too. And so the rampages are a thing that, while I appreciate how well the game balances your ability to mitigate them versus them happening, there are times you'll just have rampages, and if you don't like your fences being torn down and your watchtowers being destroyed, that's just something that will happen from time to time. I'll say there's a tight fight for manipulation cards. Now again, this does get better with the expansion, I mentioned that already, but until you have the expansion for sure, this spot over here, trying to get a bunch of manipulation cards and play them, can be a very, very tight fight that just gets hard to do, along with everything else you're balancing in the game. This makes it a lot better. I think once I play the controlled chaos, that is less of an issue, so I think that nitpick is specifically around the base game. And then last, I'll say the unpredictability around events. There's a giant stack of event cards with a lot of different things that'll happen to you. Most of them not particularly great. Some of them are good. Some of them are good things, but they'll give you a lot of things that are going to get in your way. People fighting back with people, workers are upset who want more money. Maybe sometimes you get extra stuff for going to different locations. There's going to be a wide variety of event cards, and the randomness of those, granted with some degree of planning, might be another thing you might find less fun having those event cards in the game. As far as final thoughts on Dinogenics, Dinogenics is an interesting one because there's a lot of things that the game does really, really well. And these solo scenarios, I've played through a few of them as well. These solo scenarios are also very, very satisfying as far as giving you that feel of the core structure you're trying to approach in the game with a slightly different twist because you're trying to fulfill someone else's goals as opposed to just beat another player. But overall, I do appreciate having not just a solo mode, but solo scenarios. I never love solo modes. Not never. I usually don't love solo modes. I usually do like solo scenarios. Give me a set of constraints or something else I'm doing. Make it an interesting puzzle and not just I'm playing the game but without my friends at the table. So I do appreciate the solo modes as well. There's a lot to like here. There's a lot to enjoy. To me, the biggest thing that holds it back is how many of your actions do go to repeated stuff again and again and again where you're just kind of, again, maybe even more than 40%. I said 40%. It might be more than that. It might feel that because I guess it depends. Because the DNA cards are there's variety to that at least. So there's a little bit more of a puzzle there. Again, too much of my worker placement actions in this game, and there's not enough. Even in a smaller player count game, you're looking at, what is it, 4 times 3 for 12, and then 5 times 4 for 20, so that's 32 worker placement spots across the course of the game. And once you do the math on the basic ones, you're going to need to repeat yourself. You may be looking at 20 that are actually interesting spots. And so I think that having so much of that taken away from me is the biggest thing that holds back. That said, there is a lot to like about the game, which is it's a hard thing to evaluate. This is one of those games that for me, this is going to come in at a 3.5 out of 5, but it is very much one of those times that I wish I had like a 3.75 score because I do feel this one is just shy of being a 4. It's mainly the worker placement spot and the repetition of the worker placements that does hold it back for me a bit. And that's basically it. That's Dinogenics and Controlled Chaos, a 3.5 out of 4, but just a 3.5 out of 5, but close to that 4 mark. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, obviously check out Dinosaur Island, a very similar themed game, but with very different mechanisms. And then if you want a game that's going to feel similar a bit, check out Agricola. It very much has a similar arc as far as how you're building things, putting them into your park, managing your animals, just in a very, very different theme and setting, and a whole lot of different things happening. But definitely check out Agricola. Definitely share some common DNA, pun intended this time. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.